It happened at midnight. A deafening explosion shattered the silence of a remote highway construction site outside Ouagadougou. The air filled with smoke flames, danced through half-built concrete pillars, and the ground shook beneath the weight of twisted steel and broken lives. 5 black workers lay lifeless beneath the rubble, blood soaking into the red soil they had sworn to rebuild. The site was part of a flagship infrastructure project managed by a Western contractor. But what was meant to be a symbol of progress had become a massacre. The news broke like wildfire across the country. People flooded the streets in mourning and rage. Foreign media kept silent. The Western contractors vanished behind embassy walls, refusing comment. Inside the darkened war room of the presidential palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré replayed the security footage over and over, his jaw clenched. One clip buried deep in a corrupted server revealed what others tried to hide: a last-minute switch of critical materials. A decision that turned a highway into a trap. "They're not just building roads," he growled under his breath. "They're digging our graves." By dawn, he stood before the nation, no speech, no teleprompter, just the fire in his eyes. "This is not an accident, it's sabotage. They didn't just kill 5 of our brothers, they tried to cripple our future. But they've chosen the wrong soil. In Burkina Faso, we bury our dead with honor, and we bury our enemies with resolve." That very night, he terminated every Western contractor in the country. All foreign infrastructure deals revoked, assets frozen, borders shut. And then came the declaration that would echo across Africa: "We will build 130 roads, with our hands, with our hearts, with no help." The truth never reveals itself in daylight. It hides in shadows, where deals are whispered, not signed, where glances replace signatures, and where 5 black men were buried alive beneath concrete that had no business standing. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't call a press conference. He assembled a special investigative task force comprised of independent engineers, former military officers, and national security experts. His instruction was simple: "Don't bring me excuses. Bring me the truth." Within 24 hours, they descended on the wreckage. What they found was beyond negligence, it was sabotage. One engineer reported that the main support bolts were substandard, not even listed in the original construction specs. The tension cables were cheap knockoffs. Operator manuals on site were in French with footnotes in German. No German company had ever been formally contracted. But the real horror came from a corrupted security feed recovered and decrypted by the intelligence team. In grainy black and white footage, a group of foreign men dressed in blank safety vests with no company logos were seen dismantling part of the primary scaffolding under the cover of night. They moved with precision, no hesitation, no urgency, and they vanished into the dark like ghosts, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks in the red earth. When the video played in front of President Traoré, he said nothing, just silence. The only sound was the low hum of the playback reel. Then he turned to his national security advisor and said, "This wasn't just murder. This was a message telling us we're not allowed to stand on our own." Later that day, a leaked internal email from a Western subcontractor reached the desks of the Ministry of Infrastructure. In it, a senior project manager wrote, "If we let a few sites collapse, they'll have no choice but to call in specialists from Paris. Let them flounder in the mud for a while." The nation reeled. From the cafes of Bobo Dioulasso to the high offices in Ouagadougou, the whispers turned into fury. This wasn't incompetence. This was an invasion. No bullets, no tanks, just control, precision, and cold blood. And that was the moment Ibrahim Traoré struck back. No United Nations, no diplomatic cables, no international court. Just one man, one camera, and one map of Burkina Faso. Live on national television, wearing a simple white shirt. Traoré pointed to each road where blood had been spilled, where trust had been broken. "I'm not just expelling them," he declared. "I will erase their footprint from this land. And we will rebuild every road, brick by brick, with the same hands that buried our brothers. That night, no one in the country slept. 3 days after expelling every Western contractor from the country, Ibrahim Traoré walked into an old dusty hall in Ouagadougou. No spotlights, no microphones, no fancy boardroom tables. Just wooden chairs, ceiling fans, spinning lazily, and nearly 100 people, village elders, students, ex-soldiers, teachers, market women gathered in silence. He didn't stand on a stage. He stood among them, level eye to eye. His voice was low, steady. They think we'll fall apart after what they did. They don't know us. If we have to, we'll build every single road ourselves. No aid, no loans, no begging. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It didn't need to. Heads nodded slowly at first, then with resolve. That was enough. The revolution began that day, not with gunfire, but with a promise. Within a week, radios crackled across Burkina Faso with a new kind of announcement. If you can operate a bulldozer, report to your local office. If you can push a wheelbarrow, come forward. If you have only your hands, your country still needs you. More than 20,000 people answered the call. Some quit jobs. Some sold their last motorbikes just to get to a construction site. A teacher walked away from her classroom. A retired soldier limped into a work zone with a cane. A father brought his 14-year-old son. No one asked about pay. They asked, "When do we start?" In the south, the machines roared to life. 900 construction vehicles, excavators, bulldozers, dump trucks rolled across the land like steel elephants. Each had been stripped of old international logos. Painted by hand on their sides were 5 bold words: Faso Tika, the motherland calls. Children cheered from the roadsides as the machines passed. Women waved from balconies. Workers slept in tents under the stars caked in red dust, rising each morning to dig, pave, and build. These weren't laborers, they were warriors of dignity. Each road had a story. The Po-Kalinka route reconnected farmers to forgotten markets. The Dande-Korma link reopened access to medical clinics. In the city of Gawa, asphalt wasn't the only thing laid. They rebuilt drainage to end the annual floods. And everywhere plaques bore the names of those who built them. For the first time in their lives, people saw their names carved into the future. One morning, with no press in sight, President Traoré arrived at a work site. No convoy, no guards, just an old pickup truck and his weathered boots. He knelt down, placed his hand on the warm, newly paved road, and looked around at the stunned workers. This wasn't built with machines, he said. It was built with pride, and pride doesn't need permission. The world didn't know how to react. At first, international headlines scoffed. Populism, anti-globalism, nationalist stunt. But then the satellite images showed new roads cutting through the heart of West Africa. Export data skyrocketed. Crops reached markets unspoiled. Investors took notice. A French journalist snuck into a southern site expecting disorder. Instead, he found a 70-year-old woman pushing a cart of gravel beside her grandson. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because I've lived a lifetime waiting for someone else to build roads for me," she answered. "Now I do it myself." By the 6th month, 89 roads had been completed. Over 1,000 kilometers of new infrastructure. No Western loans. No foreign oversight. Traoré didn't hold a press conference. He wrote a letter, handwritten, copied and posted in every village. "We have done the impossible, and we've only just begun." Month 8, the 130th road, was completed on a windy morning in the highlands of northern Burkina Faso. No flags, no music. Just a few workers sitting by the roadside, bottles of water in hand, watching the first cars roll across fresh black asphalt. Then one of them began to cry, not from exhaustion, not from pain, but because for the first time in his life he was looking at a road built by his own hands. No aid, no debts, no foreign flags above it. In the presidential residence in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré, sat alone, writing the final lines of a speech he knew might be the most important of his life. Not because he craved recognition, but because he knew the real battle was just beginning. That evening across Burkina Faso, people gathered around flickering TV screens in mud huts, in roadside cafes, in city apartments. Traoré appeared wearing the same white shirt he had worn at countless work sites. No background music, no dramatic lighting, just him and the eyes of a man who had walked through fire. Tonight he began, "I will not speak of roads, I will speak of people." 130 roads, each paved with blood, sweat, and the silent vow of the Burkinabe people that we can. We can rise from ruin, we can turn grief into movement, and we can look the world in the eye and say, "We do not need your pity, we choose dignity." After the speech, there were no fireworks. But the next morning, villages began repainting schools. Women planted gardens. Children fetched water from repaired wells. The road revolution had ended. The trust revolution had begun. But the story did not stop in Burkina Faso. In Mali, a group of students hosted a forum titled, "Build with Our Hands." In Niger, a mayor removed European aid billboards and replaced them with one that read, "Built by the People." In Togo, a young girl wrote a letter to her president, "If Burkina Faso could do it, why can't we?" It was a wave that could not be stopped, not by weapons, not by press conferences, but by example. Ibrahim Traoré never won a Nobel Prize. He was never invited to speak at the United Nations. But months later, when he visited a small agricultural fair, something remarkable happened as he entered. People stood up. No chants, no clapping. Just a quiet, instinctive gesture, like a moment of national prayer. A silent gratitude that needed no words. Western analysts continued to write, "The Burkina Faso model is unsustainable." But what they failed to understand was this: it wasn't a model. It was a spirit. And a spirit once awakened cannot be erased by spreadsheets and policy memos. 1 year later in the village, where the fatal scaffolding had once collapsed, a new vocational training center opened its doors. On the front gate, welded in iron, were the words, "Where blood once spilled, now stands a school for rebuilding our future." History books may someday write. In that year, a man challenged the global system with a road. But the people will say something different. He didn't just build roads, he rebuilt belief. Some stories earn your admiration, others stir your heart. But few stories do both, while forcing you to reflect deeply, like the story of the 130 roads in Burkina Faso. At first glance, it looked like a story about infrastructure. A young president, Ibrahim Traoré, outraged by a deadly construction accident caused by Western contractors, decides to fire them all and rebuild using only local hands. It sounded reckless, like a man punching against the current of the world. But the more we followed the journey, the clearer it became. This was never about asphalt, cement, or bulldozers. This was about dignity. In a world where aid comes with strings, where development often arrives under the shadow of foreign control, Traoré made a bold move. He trusted his people. Instead of begging, he called. Instead of borrowing, he mobilized. Instead of importing expertise, he relied on the same hands the world had once dismissed. And that trust, that unshakable belief, sparked something many nations have forgotten: interfaith. Tens of thousands rose, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but to prove that Africans could build lid and rise on their own terms. And as those roads began to cut through the heart of the nation, they didn't just connect cities, they connected people to their pride. One man cried as he watched the first car roll across the road he had built with his own hands. An elderly woman pushed gravel beside her grandson and whispered, "No one ever built roads for me. Now I build them myself." This wasn't just labor, it was transformation. It was people reclaiming authorship over their future. Of course, the global reaction came swiftly: skepticism, criticism, warnings about sustainability. But when the roads showed up on satellite images, when trade tripled, when rural schools reopened, suddenly the world fell silent. And the best part, Ibrahim Traoré, never waited for their approval. He only needed his people to believe. Then, something extraordinary happened. The story crossed borders. In Mali, students held forums titled, "Build with Our Hands." In Niger, a mayor took down a European aid billboard and replaced it with one that read, "Built by Us." In Togo, a little girl wrote her government, "If Burkina Faso did it, why can't we?" It became a quiet wave, no guns, no slogans, just example. And example is louder than words. Traoré never won a Nobel, never gave a speech at the UN. But one day, when he walked into a small farming market months later, people stood. Not to applaud, not to chant. They just stood in silence, in respect, in gratitude. Western analysts kept writing, "The Burkina Faso model is not sustainable." But what they missed was simple: it's not a model, it's a spirit. And a spirit once awakened cannot be undone by reports and press briefings. 1 year later, in the same village where the deadly scaffolding once collapsed, a new vocational center opened. Its iron gate bore the words, "Where blood once spilled, now rises a school to rebuild our homeland." History books might someday says. In that year, a man challenged the global system with a road, but the people will remember it differently. He didn't just build roads, he rebuilt belief. The story of the 130 roads in Burkina Faso is not merely about infrastructure, it is about liberation, self-belief, and the reclamation of national dignity. It begins not with machinery or budgets, but with tragedy, an explosion on a construction site that killed 5 black workers. The materials used were substandard. The surveillance footage revealed foreign saboteurs. Western contractors fled the scene and refused comment. The international media remained silent. And from that silence, a storm was born. One of the most powerful lessons from this story is the transformative power of trust. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and announced that they would build all 130 roads with their own hands, many viewed it as impossible, even suicidal. But Traoré believed not in foreign aid, not in colonial expertise, but in his people. By calling on farmers, teachers, ex-soldiers, and ordinary citizens to take part in rebuilding their homeland, Traoré redefined the role of leadership. He showed that real leaders don't command from above, they stand eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder. His call didn't just ignite a project, it ignited a spirit. The tragedy at the highway site made one thing clear: so-called development assistance can sometimes be a disguise for dependence. The subversive tactics revealed in leaked emails, encouraging infrastructure collapse to re-invite foreign help, highlighted a painful reality: not all partnerships are built on equality. Traoré chose rupture over reliance. By revoking every Western contract, freezing assets, and shutting borders, he taught a critical lesson. Sovereignty is not something handed down from global institutions. It is something you claim, even if it costs you. What Burkina Faso experienced was not just a construction effort, it was a dignity movement. People volunteered with no promise of pay. Women pushed carts of gravel. Children watched as roads took shape in towns that had been forgotten for decades. It is easy to see development as a function of money, but this story teaches us that dignity is more powerful than capital. When people feel ownership, when they know the road is theirs, they give more than labor. They give legacy. The West called it unsustainable, populist, and anti-globalist. But while analysts wrote their critiques, satellite images told a different truth. Roads were being built. Trade was increasing. Markets were reopening. This contrast reveals a deep lesson about the power of narrative. Those who control the global conversation often shape perception. But Traoré refused to play that game. He didn't lobby for press coverage. He didn't plead for validation. Instead, he let the roads speak. And in doing so, he taught us, when your results are undeniable, your story tells itself. One of the most striking scenes in the story occurs not on a battlefield, but in an old hall where Traoré sits among his people, not above them. No microphones, no stage, just presence. This moment is more than symbolic. It reminds us that leadership is not about distance. It's about proximity. It's about knowing when to speak and when to listen. The quiet nods of the people that day were louder than any applause, because leadership at its core is about trust earned, not power imposed. Many viewers described the story as both heartbreaking and inspiring. One person wrote that the moment President Traoré stood in silence watching the corrupted security footage was the most powerful leadership image they had ever seen. It wasn't theatrical, it was human. Another said that when Traoré declared the sabotage as a message from outsiders, they finally felt someone had voiced the quiet truth so many Africans carry in silence. A teacher from Kenya commented that she wept when she read about the students and villagers building roads together. For her, it wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about all post-colonial societies reclaiming their futures. She stated that the story reignited her belief that Africans don't need permission to begin healing what colonialism broke. A farmer from Ghana described how the scene of a 70-year-old woman pushing gravel beside her grandson reminded him of his own mother who spent her life waiting for government help that never came. He wrote that he showed the article to his children and told them, "This is what real independence looks like." Several readers expressed shock and outrage at the sabotage, especially the leaked email suggesting that letting infrastructure collapse would force Burkina Faso to call Paris for help. One comment simply read, "This is not partnership. This is warfare without bullets." Another user responded, "They've replaced tanks with tenders and guns with grants, but the damage is just as deadly." There was widespread admiration for the statement, "We will build 130 roads, with our hands, with our hearts, with no help." One commenter from Nigeria said it sent chills down his spine. He described it as a declaration of war, not against any country, but against the mindset of dependence. Many users focused on the symbolism of the machinery being repainted by hand, with the words Faso Tika, the motherland calls. A woman from South Africa wrote that when she saw this detail, she realized that this wasn't just a construction project, it was a spiritual awakening. She called it Pan-Africanism with muscle. A Somali university student wrote that Traoré's actions proved that pride and productivity are not mutually exclusive. He argued that what the West calls unsustainable is actually just uncontrolled, because it's outside their financial leash. Another comment from Senegal stated that the story proves true. Leadership doesn't come from PhDs or economic forecasts, it comes from courage. The user added that it is easier to follow spreadsheets than spirits, but Traoré chose the harder path, and history will remember him for it. A user from the diaspora in France reflected that the quiet moment when workers cried at the 130th road struck him more than any political speech ever had. He said it reminded him of how his grandparents were forced to leave their country to find work abroad, while today's generation might stay and build, because someone like Traoré dared to believe. There were many comments acknowledging the media silence surrounding the original attack and the rebuilding that followed. One user noted that if this had been a Western president refusing aid, it would have made global headlines. Instead, Traoré's resistance was dismissed or ignored. "They're not afraid of failure," the user wrote. "They're afraid we might succeed without them." A youth activist from Uganda commented that the Burkina Faso story should be taught in every African classroom. He proposed that every student write an essay on what it means to build with your hands and reflect on what role they could play in shaping their own country. Several users praised the part where Traoré wrote his speech by hand and posted it in villages instead of delivering it through national media channels. A woman from Cameroon wrote that this reminded her of how elders used to deliver truth quietly, respectfully, and with moral force. She stated that Traoré didn't seek applause, he sought awakening. A man from Tanzania shared that the phrase, "We don't need your pity, we choose dignity," should be painted on every public wall across Africa. He said it represents the psychological shift that must occur if true independence is ever to be realized. Others expressed a quiet sense of hope. A civil engineer from Ethiopia wrote that he was rethinking his plans to move abroad. "If Burkina Faso can do this," he wrote, "then maybe my hands are needed more here than in Europe." An elderly woman from Rwanda described the story as a healing balm. She had lived through genocide, displacement, and rebuilding, and she said this narrative gave her faith that African strength comes not just from survival, but from unity, memory, and purpose. A Malian musician commented that the story felt like a song waiting to be written. He was especially moved by the part where no one asked about pay, only when do we start. To him, it symbolized the birth of a new rhythm across the continent, one that moves not to foreign instructions, but to ancestral determination. Some comments, while supportive, also offered caution. One user from Botswana urged that while emotion is powerful, systems and planning must still follow. The spirit must have structure, he said. Others echoed that lesson inspiration must be supported with institutions to last beyond any single leader. Still, the overwhelming tone of the comments was reverence and gratitude. People didn't just see Traoré as a president, they saw him as a symbol. A young woman from Togo put it simply, "He didn't save us. He reminded us that we can save ourselves." Perhaps the most shared comment of all was a simple sentence. "He didn't just build roads, he rebuilt belief." Thousands repeated it in their posts, on posters, and in songs. In the end, these voices from across Africa and its diaspora remind us that this was not just one nation's story. It was a spark. And a spark, when caught by dry grass across a continent, does not ask for permission to burn. We often think of resistance in terms of protest, defiance, or revolution. But Burkina Faso's most powerful resistance wasn't a riot or a coup. It was a road. In choosing to build instead of burn, to work instead of wait, Traoré showed that resistance can be quiet, consistent, and profoundly productive. The world expected backlash. Instead, it got bulldozers, pickaxes, and shovels. Another major lesson lies in how unity was forged, not by speeches or flags, but by shared labor. Each person who touched that project felt they were part of something larger than themselves. They weren't just building roads, they were building a new national identity, one that no longer relied on colonial handouts or international pity. This sense of collective authorship is a powerful antidote to the fragmentation that often plagues post-colonial nations. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is how it spilled across borders. In Mali, Niger, and Togo, people took note. Students held forums. Billboards came down. New ones went up reading "Built by Us." Without a single marketing campaign, Burkina Faso exported a spirit, a belief. And in doing so, they demonstrated that the most contagious form of power is not wealth or military might, but example. The story began with death, sabotage, and grief. But Traoré transformed that pain into purpose. He channeled the nation's sorrow into solidarity. What began as a funeral ended as a movement. This teaches us a vital truth. Pain can paralyze or it can galvanize. It depends on how leaders respond. Burkina Faso may not have earned global awards. Its model may not be adopted by think tanks. But within its borders, something shifted. People stopped waiting. They started doing. And perhaps most importantly, they started believing. And that, more than roads, more than policies, is what changes a nation. One viewer from Sierra Leone remarked that the most powerful lesson in this story was not about infrastructure, but about psychological independence. He wrote that too many African countries still wait for external approval before taking action. In contrast, Traoré showed that conviction alone could move nations even without applause. He didn't ask if the world would understand, the viewer wrote. He asked if his people were ready. And they were. A civil servant in Benin described how his entire office stopped working when the footage of Traoré at the construction site aired. "We all stood up," he said. "Not because anyone told us to, but because we felt like something sacred was happening." He compared it to a spiritual reawakening, not political propaganda. Another user, a nurse in Liberia, said the story changed the way she viewed sacrifice. She spoke of her frustration with long years of underfunded hospitals, corrupt road contracts, and broken promises. But when she saw villagers rebuild roads with no pay, just purpose, it gave her strength. She wrote, "If they can give their backs and hands, I can give my patience and care." A young entrepreneur in Chad noted that the Western media's response to the road project was predictable, dismissive, cautious, and full of warnings. He claimed that this skepticism is rooted in fear that African success stories, written without Western ink, might spread. He stated bluntly, "The world isn't afraid we'll fail, it's afraid we'll stop asking for help." One architect in Côte d'Ivoire said that the images of machinery stripped of foreign logos and repainted with the motherland calls made him emotional. He argued that symbols matter, and every act of repainting those bulldozers was an act of reclaiming identity. "Our infrastructure should not carry the flags of former colonizers," he wrote. "It should carry our fingerprints." An Angolan war veteran related Traoré's resolve to his own years fighting in the bush. He said the difference between most modern politicians and Traoré is that the latter knows what it means to serve without expecting reward. He wrote that real leadership is not measured in speeches but in scars, and Traoré, he said, carries both. Many in the diaspora chimed in with bittersweet reflections. One woman in Canada admitted she left her village decades ago because she believed nothing would change. Now, watching men and women rise to rebuild without loans or foreign oversight, she felt ashamed and hopeful. They stayed, they suffered, but they built something we ran away from, she said. A student activist in Tunisia declared that Burkina Faso had become a moral compass for a continent. He said that while other nations debated debt ceilings and structural reforms, Burkina Faso took the risk of standing up. And even if they fall, he said they will fall forward on roads they laid with their own hands. A logistics worker in Morocco commented on the sheer scale of organization needed to build 130 roads without international expertise. He said that this level of coordination proves one thing: African nations are not incapable. They are often just unsupported, undermined, or ignored. Burkina Faso didn't lack intelligence, it lacked trust. And now that they trust themselves, everything is moving. One Ethiopian scholar emphasized that what happened in Burkina Faso should not be romanticized as just emotion, it was also rooted in strategy. He praised the investigative task force, the decentralized mobilization system, and the focus on training local engineers. This wasn't chaos, this was a blueprint, he said. A market vendor in Gambia expressed that her favorite moment was when Traoré sat among villagers instead of speaking from a podium. She said that gesture alone spoke louder than any national anthem. "He made us feel like owners, not spectators," she wrote. Multiple comments pointed out the spiritual undercurrent in the story. A pastor in Malawi wrote that the phrase, "We bury our dead with honor and we bury our enemies with resolve," had biblical weight. He compared Traoré to a David who did not bring a stone, but a promise to fight with dignity, not destruction. A widowed mother from the Central African Republic described how the story gave her the courage to teach her children something new, that waiting for help is not the only option. She now asks her sons and daughters each morning, "What can we build today?" A retired economist from Algeria reflected that international financial institutions will likely never support a model like Traoré's. "It threatens their entire philosophy," he wrote. "If Africans succeed outside of IMF frameworks, the question becomes, why did we ever need them?" A Zimbabwean journalist praised the moment when no one asked about salaries. He called it the day dignity paid in full. He argued that when people work for something they believe in, not because of fear or hunger, that labor becomes sacred. An activist from the Democratic Republic of Congo stated that the most radical act in the entire story was not the expulsion of contractors, but the rejection of pity. "The world wants to feel sorry for Africa," he said. But Traoré told them to keep their sympathy. He asked for nothing. "That's the scariest thing a former colony can do, stop begging." A refugee in Italy wrote that the story gave him a reason to dream of returning. He had lost faith in home. but seeing students, elders, and even retired soldiers come together to build something real reminded him that change is not always about elections or revolutions. Sometimes it's about roads. One user from Sudan made an observation about legacy. He said that unlike many leaders who build monuments to their power, Traoré built something more lasting: belief. Statues fall, policies change, but dignity once planted grows. Finally, a young girl from Namibia, only 14, left a simple comment under a photo of the last road being completed. "One day I'll build something too." Her words echoed thousands of others. Across languages, regions, and generations, the message was clear. This was more than a story. It was an invitation to believe, to begin, and to build no matter the odds.